We're back, and this is video number 3 as part of week 2, looking at national data. We just worked our way through the National Center of Education Statistics digest of Ed Statistics. Lots of tables, lots of numbers. In both cases, you saw me have to pull things down into Excel to do a little bit more interpretive work. I'm going to come back to sharing my screen so that you can see. We're going to go and return. We're returning to our webpage. So this is our Brightspace shell. We're still in week 2 in the content. Today's college students. We've looked at the Lumina Foundation's very pretty presentation of stories and statistics of today's college students. In video 2, we saw the digest of education statistics and loads of tables, many in cases from 1960 to 2018, and in other cases, all 50 states in the District of Columbia. Next up, we're going to look again at the National Center for Education Statistics, but this time we're going to look at the Condition of Education report. And I want you to take a look at the different indicators in the post-secondary student subsection. And then I want you to write a paragraph about some of these data. So we're going to open link in a new tab, write a paragraph about how these data and their interpretation support or refute or add some more nuance to what you learned from the education statistics. So writing an extra paragraph. Just opened up. And here we go, undergraduate enrollment. Again, you can see here the Condition of Education report. There is an executive summary, the reader's guide, the condition of education at a glance. And again, I want to point out we have indicators by different sort of stages in the educational process. So we start with primary, elementary, and secondary education. And then we move into post-secondary education. Again, we have population characteristics and economic outcomes and international comparison. So there's some real crossover and similarity with the digest of education statistics tables. But what's one of the first things you notice? My screen popping up. Some graphs. Some other ways to visually tell the story about these data, as well as text, other ways to tell the story, and popping out text, highlighting it, and using as a quote. So here we go. Between 2000 and 2018, the total undergraduate enrollment in degree granting post-secondary institutions increased by 26%. If you think about that, that would make a lot of sense when you go back to 1960, and from 1960 to 2018, that increase was nearly 100%. It almost doubled completely. So that's what this is showing. Females enrollment in post-secondary education in 2000 was greater in their total number than men. That trend stayed virtually identical, right? Just a little wider here through 2005. And then notice here, there was a steady bump between what appears to be 2007, and then really goes up. Why might that have been? The recession. People go to university and college during a recession to gain skills that will then help them in the workforce, particularly when the workforce is hemorrhaging jobs. And then we have seen some tail off. And right now we continue. This was projected because these data are only through 2018, but we've seen additional fall off. And for 2020, which we'll pull up some reports in another week, our actual enrollment in 2020 in the fall decreased by double digits. So very concerning for those who follow this. So this is one of those tables that I think can really tell a story. You just saw me in real time begin to interpret, what am I seeing? This is projected, and notice that it looks pretty much the same. This is, they're not making big projections because we just don't know. And certainly when this came out in 2018, there was no thought that there would be a global pandemic. So this projected made sense when the projection was being made in 2018. We know that the actuality has seen greater decreases. And if we were to pull up the 2020 data, which we will in another week, you will see that decline. Here we can look at undergraduate enrollment by race and ethnicity. And so over time, in the fall of 2000, 2010, and 2018. So this is an interesting thing to note. So fall 2000 enrollment for white Caucasian students was 9 million. It increased in 2010 as we saw that fairly substantial bump here in 2010 across all students or many students, but then declined in 2018 among white high school graduates. This shift is not replicated by all race and ethnicities, right? We see that bump in 2010 among Black high school graduates pursuing some level of post-secondary, but trailing off to being that is lower than in 2000 in 2018 is not replicated among Black high school graduates who are pursuing post-secondary. And that trend that we see among white students is not at all replicated among Hispanic students. In fact, there has been a consistently greater increase in enrollment in post-secondary institutions among the Hispanic high school graduates. So this is why we look and we disaggregate and we start to peel back the onion to understand what is the college experience, who are college students, and how are they changing in their characteristics over time by a whole host of input characteristics and what they bring with them to college. This looks at full-time, part-time enrollment. So full-time enrollment has long been more prevalent than part-time enrollment. You really saw, so notice how narrow this is here and how much wider during the recession the full-time, part-time enrollment deviation grew. Again, there was less work. More people were going to go back to college or university and do so full-time because they weren't working to the same degree. So what I'm inviting you to do is to really walk through all of these indicators and pick one or two and interpret it and see, how does that compare? What do you see about this? How does this tell a story in a way that might have been different or a little harder to detect in looking at the digestive education statistics tables? You can see here that we have a largely public post-secondary world in the United States. That said, the private nonprofit has remained fairly flat, and if we were to project beyond 2018, it will decrease because there have been a number since the recession and the pandemic of private nonprofit post-secondary institutions closing or merging. Notice here, again, this uptick at 2010 during the height of the recession. This is looking at 4-year, 2-year enrollment. This is very interesting to me, that 2-year college enrollment decreased from 2010 to 2018. I'm curious why that would be the case. I don't have an answer. I'm going to ask, do you have some ideas why that might be. Some of the shift in enrollment patterns for 2-year and 4-year institutions is likely explained by 2-year institutions beginning to offer 4-year degree programs. Well, isn't that interesting? So from about 2010, as this shifts down, they cause their classification to change. So some of those 2-year colleges that had been on that trend up through 2010, all of a sudden became able to grant 4-year degrees, and thus they were reclassified. And so their enrollment, those students, those millions of students, are no longer in a 2-year college like at Miami-Dade Community College, but they're now counted in this 4-year number. Very interesting. So it's important, I want to point out, it's important to look at the numbers, to look at the graphs, look at the tables, pay attention to the note. What are the dates? What's being included? What is not? These are Title IV federal financial aid institutions. So if an institution doesn't take any federal funding, receives no students who have financial aid, they're not included. Now, there's not a whole lot of those institutions, but there are a few. And then to start to look at how is this being interpreted in text and how is it being presented. I invite you to spend some time and do some of this level of interpretation yourself as part of your week 2 discussion post. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We'll end the recording and we'll come back to look at state level data.